Okay, can anyone hear me? We're having just, looks like a little bit of trouble here. We're trying to get Law on here. It worked in rehearsal, believe me. Okay. Great, thanks everybody. We're just waiting for Law. We're trying to figure out why we can't hear him. He's the important person, so we'll get to him. Okay, Law's asking me some questions. We'll get him. Just hold on, everybody. There's always a technical glitch. I don't know if it's something on my end or his, so I apologize, everyone. Law just wrote, if you saw that it worked in rehearsal, worked on Saturday. So we're just trying to figure out what is different today. Law, are you able to see and hear me? Let me try one other setting, folks, and I'll get this. We'll get this all set up. So again, I thank you for your patience. Make sure this doesn't last more than a couple seconds. Okay, Law, I resent you an invitation. So maybe if you try logging in again through Zoom. Okay, let's try something different. Law, you're on. We can at least.
Okay, can you hear me or see me?
Yeah, for some reason, and I'm gonna have to ask our ITS people, for some reason it transferred you from panelist to just participant. I can't see you right now, but if you try maybe on your screen, I don't know if you're using your phone or your computer.
I'm using. So what do you want me to do?
Are you able to see on the bottom of your screen, is there anything with video that says like, mute over video or anything?
No.
Okay.
I see a blank figure in the middle of my screen, but.
Okay. Well, why don't we get started, let you talk, and I'll see if I can figure out a way to get the video on for you. Well, I'll ask our IT people, because this, as you said, it worked the other day. So I don't want to keep everybody waiting. We can at least hear you.
Okay, well, that's fine. And let me ask this, how many students are on, or how many other participants or people participating in this webinar are there?
We have, we're up to 60 right now.
Oh my goodness, that's unbelievable.
And it may be just because they're tuning in to actually see your face. It's like, you know, the cliffhanger. And so we'll provide that for them at the end. But
Okay.
why don't we get started? And I'll try to figure out if there's a setting that I'm missing somewhere or something that's happening that you're not listed as a panelist. You're only listed as an attendee. And I don't know why it's doing that.
Okay.
I'll try to figure it out. But everybody, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I wish you could see Law right now, but the audio, I guess we'll have to do for right now. And you'll just get to see his name on the screen. Law has been a prosecutor for what, over 40 years, Law?
Yeah, actually pretty close to 47 years from the day I was first sworn in as an assistant DA.
Okay. And Law's going to tell you a little bit about his particular history as a prosecutor. And he also is a professor as well and has taught a number of classes at IUP in Pennsylvania and also University of Pittsburgh. Law is probably one of the, I've known Law for 20 plus years, and I always said that if I ever was charged with a crime, I would want Law to prosecute me. Now I'd lose because he's that good of an attorney, that good of a prosecutor, but I would know that if I was actually found guilty, that it was because it was a fair trial. There were no corners cut. Everything was far above board. Everything was honest, and that he was diligent in what he did, and also that he would be fair. And so I don't know if there's a better compliment for a prosecutor than to say that a prosecutor is honest and fair and diligent, and we could throw a few more adjectives in there as well. But I don't want to take up more of his time, so I'm going to turn it over to Law, and he's going to talk for maybe 15 to 30 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to questions. You can type the questions, and I'll keep track of that. I'm going to blank out my video so you don't have to stare at me for a while, and I'm going to try and figure out, see if we can get video on for Law. But in the meantime, feel free to ask questions in the sidebar, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. So it's all yours, Law.
Well, Professor Smith, thank you very much for the very kind words of introduction. I really appreciate hearing that. And as you noted in your opening, one of the things that is probably most important to any practitioner of the law is to be respected, not only among the people that you work with on a daily basis, in my case, police, fellow prosecutors, judges, but also the defense attorneys. And my retirement began about a year and a half ago after almost 47 years of being a prosecuting attorney at both the state of Pennsylvania level and also the county of Allegheny as an assistant and deputy district attorney. And one of the things that was most striking to me at my retirement, I received accolades from a number of the premier defense attorneys, both the state of Pennsylvania. And I think, hold on, I think maybe, okay, I think maybe you have me now, Professor Smith. Is that, am I coming through okay? Oh, okay, well.
Yep, you're coming through. We can thank Susan Nell, who's helped to organize all of this, because she said that there was a way to promote you to panelist. So you've just been promoted. You've barely been speaking and you already earned a promotion.
Well, that's good. I appreciate that. Well, when Professor Smith asked me to become involved in this project, which is, despite many, many decades of being a professor at various levels in both university, colleges, and also schools of law, this is my first time that I've been involved in a webinar, especially something that has so many participants on the other end. So if I make a mistake, if I don't do something right, I'm sure you students will let me know right away. But I'm actually very anxious to participate in this, because I understand that one of the real key reasons to have this particular part of Professor Smith's program is because individuals out there might be interested in a career as a prosecuting attorney. And I will say this, if you're looking for somebody who has had the experience, you probably won't find too many people who either through longevity or through variety of prosecutorial functions could exceed what my history has been. I actually started out as a teacher in a relatively small town in Western Pennsylvania. I had graduated with a teaching degree from Indiana University of Pennsylvania. I never really thought about going to law school until after my third year of teaching. And it seemed that although I enjoyed the teaching, there was a calling out there. And when I applied for both graduate education through doctoral programs and also to 3 different law schools, I was accepted at all 3 of both my law schools and the graduate programs for history. And I chose to go to the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. And in 1973, 3 years later, I graduated. My goal at the time I started was, first of all, just to get out of law school and to make some money. Teaching at that time in the early 1970s, actually late 60s, early 70s, was not as lucrative as it has been over the last 10 or 20 years. But lawyers always seem to make money. There was a gentleman in my church who worked for one of the large law firms in the city of Pittsburgh, Reed Smith Shaw McClay, and he was one of the founding partners of that firm way back in the 1920s. And he convinced me that if I was going to go to law school, then I should look to pursue corporate law and particularly taxation law. He said that way you'll always have a job, whether you're in a private sector or in a governmental sector. That's what my goal was when I was a freshman, my first year of law school at Pitt. The problem is, in my second year of law school, I signed up for an internship in the Allegheny County District Attorney's Office. That was in the spring of 1972. And to be quite frank with all of you out there, I never looked back again. The excitement of working in a prosecutor's office and having every day different than the day before, and being able, after many, many decades of serving as a prosecutor, I'm able to say that it's been one of the most fulfilling careers that I could possibly imagine. When I went to the University of Pittsburgh, I was not law review. I was not a particularly stellar student. I'm not bragging about that, but I have to admit that there were other things on my agenda. I was married at the time. I had a family to take care of, and so I wasn't able to devote as much time as probably I would recommend any of you to do if you intend to go to law school and come out as a practitioner, either in the state of Pennsylvania or somewhere comparable. In my particular case, having had the internship during the summer between my first and second year was followed with an internship between my second and third year. And as a result, when October came around and the bar results were announced, I actually passed, believe it or not, on my first attempt. And literally the same day that the bar results were announced, I was taken down to the clerk of court, sworn in as an assistant DA, taken up to the chief trial deputy, and assigned a case. My first day in as an attorney, in the afternoon session, I started with a non-jury trial in front of a trial judge in the Allegheny County court system. What's interesting about that is one of the differences between being a prosecuting attorney and a civil litigator. You know, civil litigation is fine. A lot of my friends and colleagues from over the years earn, if not all, a substantial part of their money doing civil litigation. That's where the big bucks are. And if you do like criminal law and you are good at it, especially white collar crime or drug related cases, you can certainly make a very, very high fee for your talents that you would be showing in a criminal courtroom. But as a prosecuting attorney, I found very early on that although money is nice, and I certainly would never turn down a raise or an opportunity to move up the chain of command, I really did not look at money as being the only reason to be a practitioner of the law. And it's one of the things that each of you who are thinking along the lines of doing something like this need to resolve within your own mind. And the reason is, when you get out of law school and you start looking for jobs, which is the whole reason that you've undergone the 3-year program and gone through all that reading and all that argument and all the educational process that comes along with law school, you get to the point where you become, or it becomes a reality that you literally are going to make about 1/3 of what your fellow students in law school are going to make if they pursue a non-prosecutorial pathway. Now, not only prosecutors don't make the big bucks, nor do the public defenders. And I have an awful lot of experience in the county of Allegheny, where both the DAs and the prosecutors start out at just about $40,000 a year. Now, considering that most of the younger people, especially over the last several decades, come out with substantial debt, maybe over 100, 120,000 is not unreal for an attorney in a law school, even the University of Pittsburgh or Duquesne, let alone if you go to one of the Ivy League schools, one of the the Columbias, the Harvards, the University of Pennsylvania, your debts are going to be much greater than just $100,000. It just boils down to if you're going to get that higher degree of education through a law degree, Juris Doctorate, it's going to cost you a pretty penny. And it is hard for people who come out of law school having incurred that much debt to all of a sudden realize that big bucks just don't start flowing in. But what does happen if you're fortunate enough to want to become a prosecutor and are successful in finding a job as a young practitioner, what you will find is the public prosecutor is one of the best places in the world, along with public defender, to where you're going to have an opportunity to show your mettle in a very quick period of time. As I noted to you, I literally went from being sworn in to my first non-jury trial the very first day. I didn't have a week to look ahead of. I didn't know who the officer was other than when I walked into the courtroom, a gentleman stood up in uniform and said, "Are you the ADA?" And I said, "Yes." And he handed me a sheet of paper that had the copy of the criminal complaint that I was going to try. Now, I don't recommend that, and I will say this, especially in my tenure as a prosecutor since that very early time, that is not the way it starts now. Nowadays, we make a strong attempt, those of us who are senior staff, to make sure that our young attorneys have plenty of time to prepare a case, to understand the law of the case, to get advice from senior staffers who can help them become a successful practitioner. And of course, that's not just good for their career, but it also is a necessity for our office, whether it's DA or Attorney General, to become what the public expects, which are successful prosecution attorneys. In my particular case, I stayed at the Allegheny County DA's office through a number of changes, and I'll bring these to your attention only to show you how some of the different steps along the way might be something that you really would like to pursue. I started off in trial division, but I had an opportunity because my pleadings and things that I wrote up for my arguments for various issues before the court were deemed to be good enough that I all of a sudden ended up in the appeals section, where you're not doing day-to-day litigation in the trial court, but you're working with transcripts of trial court attorneys in the prosecution side, and you're making arguments before the appellate courts, whether it is the Pennsylvania Superior Court, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, or even in one case, right before I left appeals, one of my cases was argued before the US Supreme Court. Now, I was not fortunate enough to be given that assignment. It was my supervisor who took the case, but my pleadings, everything that was written and submitted on what became a successful case for us was done by me. At that point, that would have been somewhere towards the mid to late 1970s. And it was a very difficult time for the criminal justice system. We had all those pesky cases coming down like Commonwealth versus Miranda, Escobedo, things that recognized the various constitutional rights of defense attorneys and made it even more difficult for a prosecutor to be a successful litigator on any particular case. But that being the case, it also opened up a doorway, which is still there, and it is a doorway that we call pretrial diversion. And ironically, even though I had the experience in appeals, I had experience in trial court, a new district attorney came in and assigned me to be one of the co-directors of a pretrial diversion program called Accelerated Rehabilitative Disposition, or ARD. For those of you that are familiar with the Pennsylvania system of justice, it's a system by which the prosecutor uses his or her intellect to decide which particular defendants can benefit from a pretrial diversion, save the Commonwealth the expense of going through a trial, be it judge or jury, and yet end up with a person who will be less likely to be a recidivist. Having had that experience over about 4 years, it made me an administrator as well as a litigator. In my own mind, I kept thinking I'm still that trial attorney out there, but as a practical matter, for a number of years, my work was done making the decisions as to who was or who was not going to have their case go before the court and face either a fine or a sentence of imprisonment or probation. In my particular case, that coincided, that period of time, with the need to have a new chief trial deputy in our DA's office. And ironically, I was put into that senior position, which I held up until 1982. And ironically, whatever I had done as a prosecutor had become noticed by some fellows down in Harrisburg. And actually, one of my recommendations came from a woman who was at one time a supervising attorney of mine in appeals. And she ultimately went to the US District Court as a judge in the federal system, and then to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. And it was her recommendation from having known me in the DA's office that caused me to become deputy attorney general. And in fact, the very first deputy attorney general assigned to nothing but criminal prosecution for all of Western Pennsylvania. And at the time I was sworn in April of 1982, I was given, in essence, the power of the state's chief criminal prosecutor over 33 counties. Now, that was exciting to me. It was a great career move. The only problem was it also took me away from home much more than I had ever imagined. And it wasn't just in those 33 counties, but as a deputy attorney general, we took on public corruption cases, we took on organized crime cases, we took on environmental crimes cases. And in fact, my office was one of the first to actually get convictions under those statutes that came out in the 1970s to stop people from polluting the waters, polluting the land, and the air in Pennsylvania, all of which was under the prosecutorial responsibility of the Attorney General. But I tell you that because it greatly expanded not just the number of cases that I had, but the area in which I did those prosecutions. And it was not unusual for me to find myself in Philadelphia for 1 week per month, or later in Harrisburg at what we called and impaneled as the statewide investigating grand juries. And for the 15 years that I was with the State Attorney General's office, most of that time as either the chief of the Western Regional Office, or they always put different titles in there to justify your longevity. But I ended up literally 1 month a year going to grand juries. And I'm proud to say that in the tenure that I was there from 1982 to 1995, I appeared before all 9 grand juries, statewide investigating grand juries, and took on a number of cases. These are the kinds of things, as a younger attorney, even though you'd say, well, gee, you had 10 years, 15 years. If I had been in the civil litigation side of it, I still would never have been the lead attorney. It's a funny situation, but as a prosecutor, you can be in a position where you can make a recommendation for capital crimes to put someone on death row, or for life imprisonment, or for any one of a myriad of sentences that could be up to and including virtually a life in prison. And yet, if you're on the civil side, the major law firms don't want to risk having someone with only 10, 15 years of experience to handle that kind of litigation. So you're sort of boxed in if you're a civil practitioner, and I certainly found from my experiences that is not the case as a prosecuting attorney. During my tenure with the Attorney General, I had some unusual cases. I was actually responsible for convicting the first highest appointed appointee of the in the state of Pennsylvania. He was the chief second in command to the Auditor General, and the case became known, as the case involving the sale of liquor store, actually the stores themselves, even though it was a fraud, and or people buying jobs from the Pennsylvania Attorney or Auditor General. I also was one of the chief prosecutors on the 666. If any of you either had experience from the Western Pennsylvania area or heard about a character by the name of Anthony or Tony Grosso, he was an organized crime figure, had been around literally. I was born in 1945. His first conviction, I learned, was in 1947 for vice-related charges. And yet I'm the one that somewhere in the late 1980s ended up putting him in jail with 2 first-degree felony convictions that caused him to end his life as a prisoner at the Somerset prison in Western Pennsylvania. Some of the other cases that were of significance, I tried a case against United Refining up in western part of the northern tier, up near Warren, PA, when a company was bought out by a very prominent gentleman from New York City who decided he was going to violate the rights of all his people in his office, including senior staffers all the way down to the people who worked on the floor of his factory area at United Refining. And what we found out, utilizing the state police, local police, and my own Bureau of Criminal Investigation investigators, was that this particular individual had done on over 100 provable cases, violated at a felony level the wiretap laws by hooking up 7 Hycamian reel-to-reel recorders. And every time a phone rang in the United Refining, that phone call was recorded and then sent to him on a weekly basis. That particular case netted his company the first time in Pennsylvania history that $1 million fine was levied against a corporate defendant. So from those kind of cases, which are clearly white collar, I was drawn into the public corruption aspect and became the first prosecuting attorney to successfully convict a president judge from a county. In this case, it was up in Ebensburg, Cambria County, and the judge was Joseph O'Kickey, who was a longtime Common Pleas Court judge. We convicted him, and he was sentenced to 8 years imprisonment for having bribed the attorneys who came before him. And literally what his crime involved was making deals with the attorneys that he would increase the delay damages, or he would get a jury to up the ante on a finding of a litigation. And in return, he wanted a piece of the action. I believe we found he had 54 different bank accounts, some in Pennsylvania, some in West Virginia, some in New York, and at least one in the state of Indiana, and several in Europe. After his appeals were exhausted, this president judge actually did what we call abjured the realm. When he was ordered to appear to begin his sentence of imprisonment, he fled the country, and Joseph O'Kickey went to the former Yugoslavian area of Slovenia, where he ultimately died in exile. Right after that case, when I thought I was done with judges, I was assigned a case against a Supreme Court Justice, Rolf Larson, and successfully prosecuted him. He was removed from the bench, given a probationary term, which was not unreasonable under the circumstance, but that made me the first prosecutor in the state of Pennsylvania to convict a sitting Supreme Court justice. That's not my only Supreme Court justice, because only a few years ago, as then an assistant DA, I was assigned a case involving Justice Joan Ori Melvin, and after many, many years of litigation, convicted her of a crime which resulted in a sentence of imprisonment of house arrest, but also removal from office. I've been told that I'm the only attorney who has ever convicted a prosecuting attorney, 2 different Supreme Court justices in their lifetime of experience. My experience after I left the Attorney General's office was to come back to the DA's office. And I went from everything to heading up the homicide unit. My last 4 years in the DA's office was as the chief homicide prosecutor for the Allegheny County DA's office. Also the head of the white collar crime unit for the DA's office. And what really became a very important part, and still is, of prosecutorial litigation is the grand jury system. As I said before, I had extensive experience in the statewide investigating grand jury, but I also had grand jury experience in Allegheny County. And for those of you who think you know what the prosecution office is, you need to look into a little more detail into the grand jury, because it's an investigative function. Most people don't realize that law enforcement in Pennsylvania, the police, the prosecuting attorney, and or people standing on the site, quote, or on the side, quote unquote, of justice, can't order anybody in to sit down and answer questions. We have a Fifth Amendment. People have the right to remain silent, and the prosecutor nor a police officer can really sit you down if you're a suspect and make you answer questions, with one exception, and that is within the confines of a grand jury situation. It's under court supervision, it's secret, but the cases that I can attest to, both in the Attorney General experience and in the DA's office, lead me to believe that there is no other tool more valuable to a prosecutor than the ability to bring a case through the grand jury system. The defense attorneys are not permitted in the grand jury. The prosecutor has literally an unfettered mechanism by which to convince a majority of the 25 permanent grand jurors and 10 grand jurors who are the alternates to get 13 of them to hand down either a document called a presentment, which is a recommendation of charges, and then there has to be a criminal complaint filed, or just recently, within the last 6 years, Pennsylvania has allowed indicting grand juries to exist, where in cases where a prosecutor feels that a witness is being intimidated, whether just verbally or physical violence, the grand jury can sit on a case and literally file an indictment, which strips from that defendant the ability to have a preliminary hearing. And if a grand jury indicts you in Pennsylvania now, you go right to your trial proceeding. Now, let me just stop for a minute. And Professor Smith, are there any questions at this point on that part of my presentation?
Well, we'll open it up because I think they've been mostly listening, but anyone has questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. It can be about Mr. Claus's career, or about prosecution generally, becoming an attorney, about the criminal justice system, pretty much anything. Feel free to open it up. And while we're waiting to see any come up, any questions, I might ask you, you were just talking about the grand jury and that being a strength for prosecutors. If there was something that you could change about the criminal justice system, and you've been involved in it for a long time, what do you see as maybe one of its weaknesses?
Well, actually, what might be characterized by a zealous or overzealous prosecutor would be what I look at as one of the strengths. And that is, I've always been the kind of a person that believed that trial by surprise, in other words, where the prosecutor knows his case or her case, but fails to advise a defense counsel of some of the facts of the case that are most damning against the defense client. I think we have a system that recognizes that mandatory discovery is just a matter of justice in our United States. And there is no question that in the past, that was not necessarily the case. In fact, we have a case on record before the Supreme Court. Fortunately, it was not mine, but it was done by a Deputy Attorney General right about contemporaneously with me leaving the office. And this particular Deputy Attorney General prosecuted a case against an accused murderer named Jay Smith down in central Pennsylvania, What the prosecuting attorney and his state police sergeant failed to do was put all the evidence that was found in the trunk of the car where the woman's dead body was found into the reports. And in fact, the defendant insisted that he was down on the shores of Jersey near Wildwood Crest in Wildwood, New Jersey, at the time this occurred, and therefore he could not have been involved in her homicide. That defense fell on flat or on ears that just weren't listening in the jury because there was no physical evidence. Well, about 2 years later, a tip came in. We executed a search warrant of this trooper's attic and found lifters, which are the devices that are sticky little, like tongue depressors, that take, for example, in this case, sand from the victim's fingernails. And no one ever turned that in, not only to the court, but not to the defense. And what it did, it caused the Pennsylvania Supreme Court not only to throw the conviction out, but to forbid another trial on the basis of prosecutorial indiscretion, prosecutorial misconduct. So if I were to say anything, I'd say that I lived through a period of time where it's been recognized that it's not right, it's not legal, it's certainly not constitutional to deprive a defendant of due process in a fair trial.
Okay, we have a question. I'll just read it.
All right.
It's the question is, understanding that the starting salary of $40,000 to $50,000 is not sufficient to start life and pay off the loans, how long does it take to make a living wage in your career as a prosecutor?
That's a very good question. I have to admit, a very good one. In the state of Pennsylvania, there are two major counties that are the exception to the rule. One is Philadelphia, one is Allegheny County, Pittsburgh. Both of those counties have staffs of upwards of 200 plus lawyers, prosecuting attorneys, plus lots of paralegals, lots of investigators, lots of clericals. In Allegheny County, because we have two law schools, both Duquesne and Pitt, literally within a mile or two of the courthouse, the adage has always been, you're not going to get a quick pay raise, because if you don't like your job, move on out and we'll find 10 other people who want your position. And unfortunately, for many, many years, despite many senior attorneys arguing against that, it's been very difficult for younger attorneys to reach a plateau where they actually have what you could arguably say is a living wage. Now, if you do work in the Allegheny County DA's office, and you start off as a trial litigator, and you move up into one of the units, your $40,000 salary will jump up to about $58,000. But to get to, for example, what my salary was at the time I left, and I was the head of homicide, I was making $88,000. I would have been better off had I stayed as a teacher back in high school, back in the 1960s, because some of my colleagues back in those times were making almost $130,000 to $140,000 a year because of their union contracts as school, secondary school teachers. So if you're looking to make money, it's not the place to go, unfortunately. If there is a hierarchy, and there is, I'd say the lowest scales are in the DA's offices, especially in the outlying areas. For example, Venango County, Mercer County, they just don't have the financial wherewithal to pay their attorneys. Even some of them don't even have full-time lawyers. They still go with part-time. And those pay are very insignificant compared to the job that is being done by them. The next level would be the Attorney General. And just as I moved from the DA's office to become a Deputy Attorney General, part of the reason I did that was because my salary almost doubled to become the Chief Deputy Attorney General for Western Pennsylvania. And the only thing that's better is if you can get a job with the U.S. District Attorney, which would be the prosecuting attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. They make probably between 140 to 170,000 just for the first line prosecution.
Okay. All right. We have two more questions, so they're starting to come in.
Okay.
The first one is, what's your biggest piece of advice for an undergrad considering law school?
Okay, I was sort of hoping somebody would ask that. And whenever I do speak to other places, that's one of the first questions that I get. Back in the old days, you had to take a course in Latin. You had to get a good liberal arts education. You had to, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with liberal arts, but let me tell you my own experiences. Now, I was a history major as an undergraduate. Actually social science with a concentration in history. And I did take Latin, ironically. I was one of the few people in the 1960s to graduate with a minor in Latin. There were only 3 people in my class, my final year of getting the certification for that. But I took it only because, to be quite frank, I didn't like French and I didn't like Spanish. I liked Latin because you didn't have to speak it. You just had to translate it. So, but the bottom line is, what I've learned throughout the years is the Latin can be a little helpful, but it's not certainly necessary. And in fact, the social sciences are very helpful, but I think the best thing is an education through English courses, literature, becoming a person who can write and speak as an educated person. There is nothing that impresses a judge than to have the written word on a pleading come in and just blow your opponent right out of the courtroom because you know how to write a document. I will say this, some of our best prosecutors came through in very non-traditional tracks. In fact, one of the people that I have probably as much respect for as anybody in our system was an art major. And what really sort of helped, and it's a woman, and what made it very important or very impressive, she used her ability of perspective to translate in her own mind crime scenes. And she also was one of the first persons to lead the use of miniatures in her trial proceedings, and miniatures that she built herself. And as a result, she made the best use of what talents she had developed in her college years.
All right, very good. We have 3 questions and 2 of them are related. So let me ask the one that's it's important to know, but maybe is a little bit easier to answer. How many hours on average do you work every week as a prosecutor, both in the office and outside the office?
Well, that's the one trade-off that is good when you see your fellow law school graduates going to the big law firms and making the big bucks, especially during the first 5, 10, maybe even 12 years. They will be working 5 days a week. They have to do billable hours of probably 10 to 12 per day average. And for them to work Saturdays and Sundays is not unusual. To be quite frank, it is my experience that in a public prosecutor's office, you have to work roughly 9 to 5 or 8 to 4, 5 days a week. With some exceptions, and I'll explain those, very rarely do you have to work on Saturdays or Sundays. As the head of homicide, I never had a day off. It was 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. My phone could ring and I had to authorize an arrest warrant or search warrant or approve something that had to do with something that was not going to wait till Monday. That's very rare among, and it's only supervisory personnel that do that, with one exception. About 2 years ago, the District Attorney of Allegheny County impaneled attorneys who are mid-level. They're not junior attorneys, they are mid-level, and they work 24 hours a day, not themselves. Each one will do only 8 hours, but that will include Saturdays and Sundays. And if they work a shift on a Saturday or Sunday, then they don't have to come in on a Monday through Friday. So we do have staffing all the time in the Allegheny County DA's office. And in some of the smaller DA's offices, some of the assistant DAs by necessity are available over the weekends. But the nice thing, the trade-off that I mentioned, is you're not getting big bucks, but you're working a regular steady 8-hour or at the most 9 hours a day, 5 days a week. And that's generally all that's expected.
Okay, I'm going to combine, there are about 5 or 6 questions that have come in, but they're kind of related,
Okay.
both from students and professors. So we have some professors in the audience too.
Okay.
The questions really relate to law school. First, how should you, I mean, you were very successful in your applications to law school. What advice would you give to a student who's considering law school? I think you've kind of said that, how to prepare, but how do you think they can make themselves more attractive? And maybe, and even more directly, there were more questions specifically asked about internships. How valuable, as if you're their future employer, you're going to look at these folks not just in when they come out of law school, but what they've done in their entire education from undergraduate to law school. How important are internships? And is your office and our other offices in Pennsylvania, elsewhere, are they receptive to having interns? So it's really, how can I improve my chances to get into law school? How can I put an internship, how important it is? And then one other question about law school, how much do you weigh the reputation of the law school when you're hiring someone?
Actually, the reputation of the law school is very important, with one exception, and I'm going to point this out. Let's assume that you want to go to law school and you have no idea where you're going to land, in what city you're going to be practicing. All you want to do is super powerful litigation, maybe New York City, maybe Boston, maybe Washington, D.C., but not necessarily in Pennsylvania, and specifically not in Pittsburgh. Columbia, any of the major schools, and they're all listed, by the way. If you go online and simply put in Google, what are the highest ranked law schools in the U.S., it'll give you a list. And I think the list is almost 200 schools. But that may not be the panacea that you're looking for. And what I point out to students that I advised both at undergraduate and when I did teach for 7 years at Duquesne's law school, sometimes there's another consideration that needs to be made. If you are going to practice in the city of Pittsburgh or in the county of Allegheny or Western Pennsylvania, it really helps to go to a local school, Duquesne or Pitt. Now, the nice thing is both of them, the costs are roughly 1/2, if that much, of some of the premier schools. So you're getting a good bargain and you're getting a good education. Both Pitt and Duquesne have very good percentages of their students passing the bar on the first time. 87%, 94% in any given year, which is really good. It's remarkable. And the reason that you might want to consider that, and I learned this having gone to Pitt and stayed in this general area, throughout your term as an attorney, you're going to be working with people you went to law school with. You're going to have colleagues that studied with you for the 3 years in school, and as a result, you're a known entity to them. And as those people move out of the practitioner area and become judges, now you're appearing before people who know you as something more than that attorney from Philadelphia, for example. So one of the things to take into account before you make your final decision is, where do you want to ultimately end up? Let's face it, if you graduate from Harvard Law School or the University of Minnesota, and I'm just picking these at random, you're going to be well prepared to, if you pass the state bar, whether it's Pennsylvania or another one, you'll be well prepared to do the job you're expected to do. But if you're going to try to surround yourself with known entities, there's nothing like going to the school in the area where most of those people are going to be practicing. And the same would be true if you want to practice in Philadelphia. You know, there's nearby law schools there that would perform the same function. Does that answer that question?
I think so. And if you, I mean, then if you can go on and talk about the importance of internships in your career, but also how difficult is it to secure internships with prosecutors, paid internships in particular, or clerkships? I know when I was in law school, I clerked with the Attorney General's office of Wisconsin. The pay wasn't great, but the experience was important. But so either as a law student or as an undergrad, how can students get internships in this field, and how important are they?
I can speak at both the state level through the Attorney General's office, and more particularly through the Allegheny County DA's office, especially in the latter, the DA's office. I don't think we could perform our function without the interns that we have. We have a few that are paid, and they're not great pay, but they're not bad either. Their salaries are roughly the equivalent of a paralegal, which can start at about $9 an hour and go up to $15 an hour. That's how the paid interns are. But we also have twice as many unpaid interns, and we always fill those positions. In fact, we have an overflow, especially with two law schools so close. Most of the law school classes are like Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And as a result, we can easily get somebody to put up to 20 hours a week in during doing unpaid internship. But I will tell you this, the benefit has been, and this is, I can only speak up to October 1st of 2018 when I retired. I don't remember an attorney being hired in the last 20 years that I was in that office that had not been an intern, either paid or unpaid, because it's the best way that a young practitioner is going to show how good they are and make a reputation for themselves, not only among the supervisory people, but among the rank and file lawyers. And nobody wants to have somebody come in that's going to not be a positive influence on the DA's office. And as a result, if you have a known entity and that person has performed for the last, usually we try to get the interns to serve 2 complete years, unpaid at first, and then if they're really good and there's an opening, we'll move them to a paid position. And then, even though most of those jobs finish up at the end of their senior year, May, we have on a lot of occasions been able to open up positions, keep them on at a little bit higher rate of pay than they were earning as an intern, to make sure that they're there when the bar results come out in October and can be hired as an assistant DA. So believe it or not, we would know for the most part, maybe by June at the latest, who the people were that were going to fill any openings after the October notification of people passing the bar.
Okay.
Internships are very important. And I will tell you, because Pittsburgh has so many, law students. Everybody's down there looking. So if you know somebody, it's like anything else. It doesn't hurt to have somebody that can introduce you. And it's not necessarily to the elected head of the office. I can truthfully say this, the quality control of the people that come in are because some of that has been delegated to senior staffers who are out looking to get the best people for the job.
I can concur. I went to Penn State way back, not that long ago. I'll just say that now. Just, when most of the people attending this chat were their grandparents were young, but it was then administration of justice, and now it's criminology. But we were all required to do a full internship, and I did mine with the public defender in a county that neighbors Allegheny County. So I got the experience from the defense side. And then, as I said, I clerked with the Attorney General's office in Wisconsin when I was there, and they both had different effects on me. The one was with the public defender. I really loved that job, and I liked working with criminal justice. And then in the Attorney General's office, it taught me I never wanted to do that job in my life because I was working in the Environmental Protection Unit, and we were in windowless offices handling appeals, and we never got to see a person that just wasn't me, and I thought it was going to be. So these internships can be, even if they don't work out the way that a student plans them to work out, that they're not, wow, this is my dream job. Instead, you say, this is my nightmare job. That's very helpful. It's better to make that decision earlier than later, because one of the questions that we have, I know we're a tiny bit over, but we can have a few more minutes left.
I'm fine as long as you and the students want to be there. I'm fine.
Well, one of the attendees asked, when should you make a decision about specializing? And that's one of the nice parts about law is you do want to specialize in some sense, but you do have, it's a broad enough degree that if you do tire of criminal prosecution, you could go into private practice and venture out into other areas. So maybe you could speak about, because they'd ask, when should you specialize?
Right. And I would say that, to be quite honest with you, I've known people who have come in and they knew that they wanted to be an environmentalist attorney. I can speak of one gentleman who is legendary in Western Pennsylvania. He was one of the premier prosecuting attorneys in the Attorney General's office in the area of environmental crimes when that was just becoming something of import. And he did an excellent job for over a dozen years. And then he decided when his family started to expand, he no longer wanted to go without. And he found that the transition to become a private, well-paid lawyer for some of these major corporations that were involved in either gas wells or I'm trying to think of the term, the people that have the pits where they take the toxic waste and dispose of them, that they'll pay a lot of money to have somebody that knows all the nuances of the environmental law. So but again, that's a little niche, okay? That's not, not everybody's going to end up being an environmental prosecutor because there just aren't that many, even across the whole state of Pennsylvania.
Okay. I think we have maybe two more questions because we're, like I said, I don't recall whether I set the meeting to last for an hour and 15 minutes or an hour and a half, so it may shut us off at some point. But the two other questions we have coming in, first, a very specific one, which is about how do you think coronavirus, this whole situation, because internships may not be given, but beyond even, I'll add to the question, not just internships, how do you think that coronavirus is going to handle or going to affect certainly hiring by law firms and prosecutors' offices, but also how do you think it's going to affect the overall criminal justice system, holding trials? I was talking about this with my friend who's the public defender talking on Wednesday, and when we chatted last week, we talked a little bit about this. How is it going to affect trials? Are they still going to be held? Are they going to be delayed? And then the last question, we'll have to end it on this one then, so is a general one. What did you like best about being a prosecutor? So we'll end it on a real positive note.
Well, let me start with the last one first. I'm the guy who wore the white hat in the courtroom. That's what I like best. In my own mind, I was the Hopalong Cassidy, the Roy Rogers, the John Wayne, when it came to being on the right side of justice. And
Paul, can I interrupt for 1 second?
Mhm.
I wonder if they even know who, I hate to say this, but do they know who John Wayne and Hopalong?
Well, let's put it
We'll
this
try
way.
to think of somebody new. Okay.
I was not
Iron Man. You were Iron Man.
Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, okay? They were on the wrong side. But my point is, I always used to kid folks in my family. I always can get up in the morning, look in the mirror, expect a good day, something that's going to be different, exciting, never the same day twice. And I can honestly say that in 47 years plus, I never had the same day twice. Sometimes they were frustrating, but you live with that. But the bottom line is I'd get up and look in the mirror, and I was not ashamed to see myself on the basis of what I did the day before. And in fact, it led itself to where my office about 10 years ago, because I was always outspoken on ethics in prosecution, I was head of a 3-person committee that I got to pick to challenge some of our prosecutors if they were going down the wrong path, whether it was discovery or over prosecuting, overcharging. And to me, that was sort of a recognition that being an ethical prosecutor is a valuable commodity to an office. Now, the other question that you asked, and I apologize, I got so excited about being the guy in the white hat, I forgot the first part of it.
Well, it's the guy in the hazmat suit.
Oh.
With the coronavirus, how are we going to handle?
Oh, yes,
how do you think
okay.
that's going to affect jobs, internships,
Already has.
but also the
It
dissipating
already
operations?
What I was, and I've been in constant contact, even though I've been gone for a year and a half, hasn't been a week that goes by that I haven't had at least 3 calls during the day or evening from colleagues that want to kibitz about what's going on. And one of the things that very quickly happened several weeks ago in Allegheny County is the court shut down. It literally shut down. We have not had trials in jury trials or non-jury. We had 9, and then it expanded to 14 deputy sheriffs who came down with the virus. And the president judge just said, that's it, we're not going to do this. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania issued an order. And the only time this was done before was in Center County. And it happened probably by now 25 years ago, where through sloppiness in the prosecutor's office, the speedy trial rule was being ignored. And finally, a couple defense attorneys, as they had every right to, brought to the attention of the court, well, the law says you have either 6 months to try somebody who's in jail or 360 days if they're not incarcerated. And yet there were cases down in that county that were 2 and 3 years old. And finally, the Supreme Court said, we're not going to allow this to happen, and started tossing cases right and left. And then finally, on some of the more egregious ones, extended the time frame for the running of the tolling of the statute for speedy trial in order to allow them to get in. And in this particular case, that order that has been signed by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is not going to be the only order that's there. This is not going away as everybody hoped by the end of March. It's going to go into April, I fear, and maybe even into May. And as a result, it's going to play havoc with the criminal justice system. You're going to see more incentive on the prosecution's part and or the judges trying to, and I know they don't really do this, quote unquote, twist arms of a prosecutor, but sometimes half a loaf is better than none. And you'll see plea bargains coming along where a year ago they might not have been the same.
And do you think their question was also about employment. Do you think this is
It
long
will.
term? Are you going to see prosecutors' offices maybe laying off people?
Believe it or not, there are people in our office that, and I'm talking the DA's office, that have not been into the courthouse in 3 weeks, let alone having interns to do anything. There's just not even the attorneys. Every once in a while, one of them will get a call and they'll say, come in, we want you to work this particular file, get it ready. So I'm not saying no one's there, but it is nowhere near the full staff that we would have had 2 months ago. They're just not there.
I'm guessing it's difficult to work with the police and others on investigations that might be ongoing.
And actually, let me just say this, though. The one good thing about dealing with the police, and especially in the DA's office, I work very closely with a police agency that no other county in Pennsylvania has, and that's the county police. And in Allegheny County, the Allegheny County Police are one of the premier detective agencies. You know, I'm not saying that some of the local municipalities don't have good police detectives, but Allegheny County has its own detective bureau. So for homicides, robberies, rapes, sexual assaults, child abuse, it's the county that jumps in. And they have no qualms about picking up a phone. And I know 2 o'clock in the morning, I'd get a call. And it would be Andy Sherman from the homicide unit, or it would be one of the guys from the child sex assault. And what's nice about having access either through an iPad or an iPhone or a laptop or your cell phone is you can give good advice literally contemporaneously with when the police are discovering it. So that's the only good thing. If this whole coronavirus had to happen, it happened at a good time technologically for the police to work hand in hand or hand in glove with the DA's, the prosecutor's office.
Okay, and it allows us to have meetings like this.
That's true.
You're in Florida, and
this was relatively painless once we got my picture up there. So
yeah, I'll take the blame for
probably
that.
scared everybody away. So.
Well, I'll take the blame for that. I'm not sure exactly what happened at the beginning, but
I know we're on Saturday, so any of your students can't complain because we did take an hour and do a run through. So we tried. That's all I can say.
Yeah, we just wanted to show them we weren't perfect, but. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight and for your great questions. And I especially want to thank you, Law. This was a fantastic talk. I've known you for a long time and I learned from you tonight. So I appreciated it. And I hope that people who came tonight will spread the word. We have some other really good speakers coming up. We have an international attorney speaking tomorrow afternoon. We have to have her in the afternoon because she's in the Netherlands and 6 hours ahead of us. So I don't think she wanted to be talking at 1 in the morning. She'll give a great talk. A public defender, so we'll hear the defense side, and I'm sure the public defender will say they wear the white hats. So we'll find out who really is telling the truth. And then
don't believe them.
Right. And then an FBI counterterrorism agent on Thursday, and then some more talks next week. So I think this was a good way to kick off this series, and I appreciate you spending your time with us, Law. And I'm looking at all the comments, and they're all saying, love to hear, Law. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, that's wonderful.
All good comments.
Believe it or not, I'll say this, and this is really pertinent to people in the prosecution side. Because the salaries are so low, a lot of us find ourselves teaching as a second career. And as I mentioned, I did it from Duquesne's Law School for 7 years to the University of Pittsburgh for 14 years before I went to IUP, which was about 7 or 8 years, I think, and then back for 13 years teaching terrorism courses at the University of Pittsburgh. So, and the reason was, to be quite honest, it supplemented my income. But I will say this, and I have said this to other students in other class settings, I was never a better attorney than when I was a teacher. And I was never a better teacher than when I was a practitioner. And especially when you deal with students, because they push you to the limit. And you can't just sit back on your behind and pretend that the world is perfect, because the students know what the new statutes are, they know what the cases are, and if you're going to maintain credibility in your classroom, you've got to keep current.
Well, thank you, Law. It's great advice to end on. And I guess we'll say good night to everybody. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, you can find me at Penn State, and I can, Howard Smith, HBS 103 at psu.edu. I'm in the criminology department, so just look me up there, and then I can send your question to Law, and I know he'll respond.
I will do that. And I'll be more than happy if you ever do this again. I'll be happy to be one of your speakers.
Thank you. Thank you, Law. Good night, everybody.
Good night.